A damp flower pot, a pile of old leaves, or the shaded edge of a garden bed can hide dozens of tiny gray creatures. The moment the cover moves, they scatter. Some curl themselves into perfect little balls, and for a lot of homeowners, the reaction is immediate. Get rid of them. Before you reach for a pesticide, stop. Those little creatures may be doing far more good than harm. The animal Americans call a roly-poly, pillbug, doodlebug, or woodlouse is not actually an insect. It is a terrestrial isopod, a crustacean. That means it belongs to the same enormous branch of the animal kingdom as shrimp, crabs, and lobsters, not ants, beetles, or termites. And that one strange fact explains almost everything about where you find them. Terrestrial isopods came from an aquatic lineage, and even after adapting to life on land, they never completely escaped their dependence on moisture. Instead of breathing the way insects do, they exchange gases through specialized structures underneath the rear part of the body. Depending on the species, these structures range from relatively exposed respiratory surfaces to more complex pleopoidal lungs adapted for life on land. That is why roly-polies rarely spend a hot afternoon walking across dry concrete. They prefer the cool, damp world underneath mulch, stones, logs, flower pots, compost, and fallen leaves. So when 20 of them suddenly appear beneath one of your planters, they are not necessarily gathering there because they are eating the roots. Often, they are there because that spot provides exactly what they need: moisture, shelter, and dead organic material. And that brings us to the job most homeowners never see. Roly-polies are primarily detritivores. Their world is filled with things we consider waste: fallen leaves, dying plant material, softened wood, fungi, and other organic debris. A leaf falls from a tree. Months later, it seems to disappear, but it never really disappears. It has to be processed. Bacteria and fungi perform much of the chemical decomposition, but larger soil animals help break that material into smaller pieces. Roly-polies are part of that cleanup crew. They chew dead leaves into fragments, digest part of that material, and return what remains to the environment in much smaller particles and fecal pellets. That fragmentation changes how decomposing material interacts with microorganisms. Experiments with terrestrial isopods have found that their activity can accelerate litter decomposition and influence nutrients in the upper soil layers. So a cluster of pillbugs underneath a layer of wet leaves is not automatically an infestation. You may actually be looking at a miniature recycling station, and their crustacean ancestry gets even stranger. Female terrestrial isopods do not simply deposit their eggs somewhere in the soil and leave. They carry their developing young inside a brood pouch called a marsupium on the underside of the body. That pouch maintains a protected, moist environment while the young develop. Think about that for a second. This tiny animal has lived on land for generations, yet the female still carries what is essentially a miniature moisture-controlled nursery underneath her body. That tells you just how important water still is to these animals. Their hiding places are not random. Moisture is written into their biology. But recycling dead leaves is not their only unusual ability. Roly-polies have another characteristic that has attracted the attention of scientists for decades. Terrestrial isopods can accumulate surprisingly high concentrations of certain metals. Studies have measured metals such as cadmium, lead, zinc, and copper inside their tissues. Some of those metals can be stored inside specialized structures in the hepatopancreas, an organ involved in digestion and storage. That ability makes terrestrial isopods useful organisms for studying and monitoring environmental contamination. But this is also where a popular internet claim goes too far. You may hear that roly-polies remove heavy metals from your soil. That makes them sound like tiny biological vacuum cleaners. The reality is more complicated. They can take up and immobilize certain metals inside their bodies, but they do not magically make lead, cadmium, or other contamination disappear from an entire backyard. They are better thought of as remarkable accumulators and useful biological indicators than as a complete soil cleaning system. And that distinction matters, because the real story is already fascinating enough. This creature you were about to spray is participating in decomposition, nutrient cycling, and the chemistry of the soil beneath your feet. But there is one important question left. If roly-polies are so useful, Why do gardeners sometimes catch them eating plants? Because there is a small piece of truth behind the reputation. Roly-polies normally favor decomposing material, but they are opportunistic feeders, and under the right conditions, especially where populations become dense and tender plant material is available, pill bugs can damage young seedlings. Field research has documented Armadillidium vulgare feeding damage to emerging crops under favorable conditions. So the correct lesson is not, pill bugs can never hurt a plant. That would be wrong. The better rule is, do not kill them until you understand why they are there. If you find 5 or 10 underneath old mulch, they are probably doing exactly what decomposers are supposed to do. If you find hundreds concentrated around young seedlings, and you can actually see feeding damage, then something in that small area may need to change. Start with the environment. Is the soil staying wet all night? Is thick mulch touching tender stems? Is decomposing material piled directly beside new seedlings? Are ripe strawberries resting against wet soil? Are old boards, pots, or garden debris creating permanently damp shelters? Those questions are more useful than immediately asking which pesticide to buy. Because if moisture, shelter, and food are creating the problem, you can often change those conditions without turning the entire garden into a chemically hostile place. Pull thick, wet mulch slightly away from vulnerable seedlings. When your plants allow it, let the soil surface dry somewhat between waterings. Move rotting boards and dense debris away from newly planted areas. Lift ripe fruit away from direct soil contact. Protect particularly vulnerable seedlings with a physical barrier if needed. You are not trying to eliminate every roly-poly from the property. You are simply making one sensitive part of the garden less attractive, and somewhere else, you can leave them a place to work. A shaded corner with leaf litter, a decomposing log, a small area where organic material can break down naturally. That gives decomposers habitat without concentrating them around your newest plants. This is one of the most useful principles in poison-free backyard defense. Not every creature needs to be removed. Sometimes you simply need to change where the interaction happens. A healthy backyard is not a sterile backyard. It is a network. Dead leaves fall. Detritivores break them down. Microorganisms continue the process. Nutrients move through the soil. Plants use those nutrients. And those plants support more life. Roly-polies are only one small piece of that system. Even their famous defensive trick tells the same story. Many pill bugs in the genus Armadillidium can curl their segmented armor around their softer underside and form a tight ball when threatened. The behavior is called conglobation. That perfect little sphere is not a pest preparing to attack your garden. It is a terrestrial crustacean protecting the most vulnerable parts of its body. Once you know what it is, the animal suddenly looks very different. It needs damp places because moisture remains essential to its respiratory biology. It hides beneath debris because those places protect it from drying out. It consumes decomposing vegetation. It helps process organic material. It interacts with microorganisms in the soil. And it can accumulate metals at levels that have made it useful in environmental research. That is an impressive resume for something most people notice only after moving a flower pot. So the next time roly-polies appear in your garden, do not begin with, "How do I kill them?" Start with a better question. What are they doing here? If they are beneath old leaves, compost, bark, or decaying wood, they may simply be part of your garden's cleanup crew. If they are concentrated around damaged seedlings, change the moisture, shelter, and food conditions around those plants first. And if they are quietly living beneath an old log at the edge of the yard, there may be nothing to fix. Sometimes the smartest form of backyard defense is knowing which creatures are actually causing a problem, and which ones are quietly working for you. Roly-poly, pillbug, woodlouse, doodlebug. People across the country have surprisingly different names for these tiny armored crustaceans. So what did you call them growing up? Leave the name in the comments, and tell us what part of the country you are from. Because the next time one of these little creatures rolls itself into a ball beneath your flower pot, you may think twice before reaching for the spray. Your garden already has a cleanup crew. You just found one of its smallest members.